Hello and welcome to the ultimate fight between the left and right. My name is Grant Strobel, and I am the chairman of Young Americans for Freedom at the University of Michigan. First, I would like to thank Mr. D'Souza and Mr. Ayers for joining us. And LSA Dean Andrew Martin for moderating. I would also like to thank our generous sponsors, the Wendy P. McCaw Freedom Lecture Series with Young America's Foundation, the University of Michigan Central Student Government, the American Culture Department, the Michigan 14th District Republican Committee, the Farmington Bloomfield Republican Club, and several other private donors. Young Americans for Freedom advances the ideas of free enterprise, limited government, and a strong national defense on campus through our efforts to bring back the screening of American Sniper, our 9/11 memorial, and through large events like tonight. Our mission is to create intellectual diversity and break through the environment of political correctness on our nation's college campuses. I think today's event serves as an example of what we look to expand at the University of Michigan, where the left and right are equally represented. In fact, if any of you are interested in the same room at the same time tomorrow, there is a diversity, equity, and inclusion planathon where I encourage all of you to go and advocate for more opportunities for the conservative perspective to be heard. During today's debate, you can tweet and post on Facebook using the hashtag #YAFDebate. But before I introduce the dean, I also want to talk about the University of Michigan policy on the freedom of expression. While this is not a university-sponsored or endorsed program, the university is deeply committed to providing a safe and open forum in which diverse opinions can be expressed and heard. It is the right of members of the university community, speakers, artists, and invited guests to express their views at the university. We will protect the right of individuals to speak or perform, and the rights of those members of the university community who wish to hear and communicate with an invited guest. Protesters have a right to express their opposition to a speaker in appropriate ways, both within this building and outside the facility. However, protesters must not interfere unduly with the communication between a speaker and the audience. If the host of tonight's program or the University of Michigan representatives believe that a protester are interfering unduly with a speaker's freedom of expression, those protesters will be warned. If warnings are not heeded and interference continues, the individuals responsible may be removed from the building. Now, I am honored to welcome Dr. Andrew Martin, the Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, and a professor of political science and statistics, as the moderator. Dean Martin's experience is in the study of judicial decision-making, particularly with the United States Supreme Court. He is the co-creator of the widely used Martin Quinn scores, which measure the ideology of Supreme Court justices, and a co-author of the recently published An Introduction to Empirical Legal Research. As Dean of LSA, Dr. Martin has emphasized the importance of scholarships, experiential learning opportunities like internships and study abroad, and increased access to inclusion for all students. He has also focused attention on ensuring that LSA students graduate with the skills necessary for success in life after college. And he has made efforts to connect with students on a personal level through the use of social media and informal gatherings on campus. In addition to serving as dean, Dr. Martin teaches courses in judicial decision-making and political methodology, including the politics of judging. He earned his Bachelor of Arts of Mathematics and Government from the College of William and Mary, and his doctorate degree in political science from Washington University in St. Louis. Please join me in welcoming Dean Andrew Martin.
Thank you very much, Grant, for the kind introduction. First, I would like to thank Bill Ayers and Dinesh D'Souza for visiting us here today to discuss their views on America. Welcome, both of you, to the University of Michigan. I would also like to thank all of the sponsors and the Young Americans for Freedom for inviting me to moderate. I have to say it is an honor to have this rare opportunity to moderate a debate between two prominent activists. Events such as this dialogue are what makes American higher education the envy of the world. The open and free expression of controversial ideas is a bedrock principle of our university. While both speakers will say things tonight many of us will strongly disagree with, having an opportunity to examine one another's beliefs in a careful, thoughtful way is an essential part of learning to appreciate our divergent opinions and striving to find common intersections where we might move forward together. Before I introduce both speakers, I first would like to outline the format of the debate. The terms were agreed upon by both parties. Each speaker will give a 10-minute opening statement and a 5-minute rebuttal. I will then ask questions submitted from anonymous University of Michigan students for 20 minutes. Then we will open up to questions and answers from the audience. Given our limited time, it is really important that those asking questions just ask questions that end in a question mark. I expect that everyone in the audience will be respectful and leave the debating to Mr. Ayers and Mr. D'Souza. And now to introductions. I am pleased to welcome Bill Ayers back to his alma mater. Bill is a distinguished professor of education and senior scholar at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He has taught courses in interpretive and qualitative research, oral history, creative nonfiction, urban school change, as well as teaching and the modern predicament. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan, the Bank Street College of Education, Bennington College, and Columbia University. Ayers has written extensively about social justice, democracy, and education, and the cultural context of schooling. He has written several books, including Public Enemy: Confessions of an American Dissident. In 1969, he notably co-founded the Weather Underground. I am also pleased to welcome Dinesh D'Souza to the University of Michigan. Dinesh has had a 25-year career as a writer, scholar, and public intellectual. A former policy analyst in the Reagan White House, D'Souza also served as a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He also served as the president of the King's College in New York City. Born in Mumbai, India, D'Souza came to the US as an exchange student and graduated from Dartmouth College. He has written several New York Times bestsellers, including What's So Great About America. D'Souza has also delved into the film business, producing 2016 Obama's America, which has risen to the second highest grossing all-time political documentary, and another film, America, Imagine a World Without Her. D'Souza has been named one of America's most influential conservative thinkers by the New York Times. Tonight, the topic of debate is American exceptionalism. What makes America so exceptional, and why should we care? On January 30th, 2014, these two met at Dartmouth College in a debate that was billed the ultimate fight between left and right. Here we are now at the University of Michigan, ready for round two. Without further delay, ladies and gentlemen, with Bill Ayers giving his opening statement first, please welcome Bill Ayers and Dinesh D'Souza to the University of Michigan.
Thank you very much, Dean Martin, and thank you all for being here. I want to just correct a couple of things and then make a personal plea, but this is not the ultimate left-right debate. I represent no one but myself. I'm not a member of a party. I don't represent any particular faction or trend. I do have a political life. I am a political activist, as is Dinesh. But I don't think of myself as representing the left. I'm representing me. And I think that, we should think of ourselves as having a conversation, not a popularity contest, not see who gets the most applause, but simply have a dialogue in which we listen with the possibility of being heard and speak with the possibility of, speak with the possibility of being heard and listen with the possibility of being changed. The other thing I wanted to say before I started is that this room is very important to me. In 1938, my parents were married in this room. It was then called the Women's League, and my mother was the president of the Women's League at Michigan, and she was the head of the independent women, the non-Greek women. And so they were married here in 1938, and 60 years later, my son and his wife were married here. So it's a pretty exciting thing for me to be in this room. And again, thank you for having me. What's so great about America? I would say there are a couple of things that I return to again and again. One is the spirit of democracy, the idea that, and it's a precious and fragile idea, that every human being is of incalculable value. Each of us is important. Each of us has dimensions that have to be taken into account. I think this should guide us as citizens and as teachers, the idea that we're quite capable of making the decisions that affect our lives without kings or queens, without autocrats or bosses, that we ourselves can make the decisions that affect our lives. That is an ideal that's never been fully realized, but it's an ideal worth struggling for, and it's an ideal that is deep in our DNA as a country. A second thing that's great about America is the inspiration of liberty, the aspiration towards liberation, the idea that all human beings ought to be free to invent and to reinvent themselves, to shape our identities in every sphere of our existence without the oppressive and traditional constraints of king or queen or church or howling mob or ruling class. We should be free to be who we want to be. And third is the pursuit of social justice in large and small matters. What is social justice? It's a phrase that gets tossed around a lot. I kind of enjoyed Pope Francis's take on it when he was in the United States. But like any compelling or layered term, social justice isn't easily or neatly defined because it's so much a point of it's not so much a point of arrival as it is a journey or a longing or a search, a quest. It's that ceaseless striving by human beings in different times and places, under different conditions, vastly different circumstances, pursuing different strategies and tactics for greater fairness, greater sustainability, greater equity, recognition, agency, peace, mobility. Those are the things that in my mind are great about America, and those are the things we ought to come together and build on. When I think of the pursuit of social justice, of course, I think historically about the people who we look to and remember as people who made a contribution to the forward progress of human beings. And frankly, those people are people who participated in social movements. No one did it alone. But when we look back, we think of the abolitionists, we think of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, we think of John Brown, and these are the people who brought us, as part of a social movement, the end of slavery. And then we fast forward and we think of the suffragettes and the women who fought for a woman's right to vote. Or we think of the people who fought for labor rights. These are the people who've made America, the great parts of America, what they are. And I think that we should maybe note, because we're here in Michigan, that clean water, for example, was brought to us by activists and a social movement that demanded clean water. And the clean air that we breathe is a function of activism on behalf of the environment. These are good things. These are the things we should be proudest of. And I think we have here in Michigan an absolute brilliant model of what happens when, in a democracy, instead of saying the solutions to our problems in a democracy is more democracy, we say the solution to our problems in a democracy is more technocrats or more bureaucrats or more private enterprise, and then we get Flint. Flint is a result of the business model of government, and it's a mistake. It's a horrible mistake that has cost real people real consequences, and frankly, it's going to cost all of us because this thing is not going to end. It's going to go on and on. So to me, those are the things we should look to and build on: the spirit of democracy, the aspiration of liberty, the pursuit of social justice. The question of American exceptionalism is quite different from that, and American exceptionalism is a problem on so many levels. So what is American exceptionalism? American exceptionalism is the idea that somehow we have a unique and special place in the world, and what it does to American exceptionalists, and it does it to us again and again, is it allows us to look at behavior and to judge actions not on the basis of whether they're good or bad, but on the basis of who did them. So we're against torture unless it's us who did it. And this happens again and again. We say, but we're Americans. We couldn't do bad things. The problem with that is it doesn't allow us to develop a kind of an honest appraisal of either the world or of history. We should not be afraid of looking history in its face and saying we can account for these things. We do it all the time, and we should do it more. So for example, we admitted as a country that we made a mistake when we interned Japanese citizens in concentration camps. That was a terrible mistake, and we gave reparations to those people. That seems to me the right thing to do, because it's a way of constantly correcting yourself. These are the kinds of things we ought to look at again and again. We ought to say, American exceptionalism, the idea that we're different than other people, that our desires are different than other people, is not true. And the idea that we're a force, as the president said recently, that we're always a force for good in the world just is not true. We overthrow governments. We've done it again and again. We support Saudi Arabia with billions of dollars in the last 2 months. This is a mistake. It's not good for us, and it distorts the possibilities of what our country could become when we lie to ourselves and lie to our children about what the consequences of our behaviors are. We should be clear that in this period we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do to end the idea of permanent war. We have a lot of work to do to oppose the kind of resurrection of an unapologetic imperialist state. We have a lot of work to do in terms of mass incarceration and correcting that. We have a lot of work to do in terms of building public education that's really public for everyone, and so on. These are the kinds of agendas that we ought to talk about tonight. What is to be done? What do we need to do to build an American community that's more robust, more fair, more decent, and more inclusive than the one we inherited? Thanks.
Mr. D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here at the University of Michigan. As I stand listening to Bill Ayers, I realize that we have some agreements, but we also have a lot of disagreements. And it's a puzzle to me about how that can be so. How can two people who are both in America, looking at the same facts in front of them, come to such radically different assessments about America? I think one of the reasons for this is because, not just because there's a generational divide between Ayers and me. He's, in some ways, no, I just mean this, that Ayers came of age in the 60s. I came of the age in the 80s. I'm a young Reaganite, if you will. That's part of the difference between us, but a bigger part, I think, is that I'm an immigrant who grew up in a different culture. Being an immigrant exposes you to some other way of life. And the immigrant coming to America is always comparing America to some other existing country. The immigrant, in other words, is using a comparative or historical standard. Ayers is comparing America, I would say, to the Garden of Eden. In other words, he's using a utopian standard, and obviously by that utopian standard, America falls short. So one reason for the difference between the immigrant point of view and the native point of view is the native point of view is utopian, which is to say it lives in unreality. Now, as I think about my own life, I came to the United States with $500 in my pocket. I came to America not knowing what to expect. And I discovered in America this bizarre thing, the American dream. And the American dream is not just the idea of economic success. That's often what it is misinterpreted to be. I have a friend in Bombay, India, who's always telling me he's been trying to come to America. He goes, Dinesh, I really want to move to a country where the poor people are fat. And that's the materialistic view of American success. But for me, I grew up in a middle-class family, and although my life is materially better in America, that difference is not radical. My life has actually changed more in other ways. The most important thing that America has given me is the opportunity to be the architect of my own destiny, to be in the driver's seat of my own life. This is a country in which your major decisions, where to live, whom to love, whom to marry, what to believe, what to become, those are decisions that you, the individual, make for yourself. Now, this opportunity, this social mobility, in which people start at the bottom and make their way up the ladder, this is part of what makes America different. And the proof of it is the immigrants themselves. Because if America were to take down its borders, half the world would come here. Now, the immigrant is a very reliable testifier to American exceptionalism. In sociology classes in this university, you might be told until the cows come home that all cultures are equal. But every immigrant knows that that's a lie, because the immigrant is voting with his feet in the most decisive way possible against his own culture and in favor of another culture. And why would he or she do that if the other culture wasn't on the balance better? So the immigrant, people say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Actually, immigration is, because the immigrant is, in a sense, casting a ballot for the United States. Now, it seems that Bill Ayers' objections to America, I'll come back to this in more detail later, have a lot to do with American foreign policy. And I want to address that issue up front by saying that American foreign policy should not be indicted on the grounds that American foreign policy protects America's self-interest. Every country's foreign policy does that. A country can be indicted for whether or not in the process of protecting America's self-interest, does America make the world better or does America make the world worse? And I think if we look, for example, not just at the last 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, but the last 50 years, the last 100 years, America has immeasurably made the world better. I don't even want to imagine what the world would have looked like if there was no America in the 20th century. Now, the United States got into World War II for self-interest. We didn't get in until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. But having got in for self-interest, the United States defeated Nazi Germany and also Japanese imperialism, leaving the world better off. The United States got into the Cold War for self-interest. And yet, at the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Empire dissolved, all of Eastern Europe was free, Russia has all kinds of problems today, but nobody wants to go back to the old Soviet Union. So the world is better and freer for what America did. Even with regard to the Middle East, the United States has made all kinds of mistakes, and we can do a post-mortem about that. But let's remember that the United States going into these countries has not gone into those countries to loot, to make money. It hasn't done what traditional colonial powers do. America lost money in Iraq. Any other country in Iraq would have said, we spent all this money to get here, now you're going to reimburse us for every penny we've spent with your oil. But the United States, having gone into Iraq, turns over the keys to the oil fields to the Iraqis. It's your oil, buy it, sell it, burn it, do what you want. So Jefferson called America an empire of ideals. And I think that's on the balance true. We've been the kindest, gentlest empire in world history. Let's not be utopian or foolish. Someone is going to have the kind of power that America does in the world. Either we have it or we give it to someone else. And who? Do you think the Chinese or the Russians or the Indians or the Brazilians would use this power better? Because that is the effect of withdrawing American power. Obama has withdrawn American power in the Middle East, and as a consequence, we have ISIS taking over large areas of territory and doing what ISIS does. So what about the liberty, the freedom, the chance to shape their destiny of the people over there? Now, at the end of the day, this is a debate about democracy. Bill Ayers talks about personal liberty. But those ideas can be in conflict. People can vote democratically to deprive other people of their liberty. So ultimately, this is not just a matter of are we for democracy, are we for liberty? It's what kind of democracy? What kind of liberty? Do we want the freedom of gays to marry, but not economic freedom? Why is one type of freedom better than the other? Why do some people get to vote to take away other people's money, but not to take away other people's rights? I think as an immigrant coming to America, I've seen both sides of America. I've been in a federal confinement facility with a group of 120 hardened criminals. So no longer would I say that I live in a rarefied world of intellectual debate. I've seen the upside of America, and I've seen the downside of America. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade the United States for any other country. At the end of the day, my enthusiasm for American government, for the Obama administration may have dimmed, but my enthusiasm for this country burns brighter than ever. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ayers, your rebuttal.
I don't know that I'm going to have a rebuttal, but I reject the idea that what I'm asking for is a utopian view of America. I'm asking us to take a hard, close look at reality. And reality tells us that we can do so much better. The richest country in the world having the greatest divide in the industrial world between rich and poor is a mistake. We can correct that. There's no reason that we have to accept that as a way of life. We do not have to be the major incarcerator of human beings on Earth. We have 20% of the world's prisoners are in our prisons. 2.5 million of our fellow citizens are in prison. That's unconscionable. That's unnecessary. And the idea that we would then give that over to private corporations so that private prisons, who have an incentive for laws like 3 strikes and you're out, for laws like indeterminate, indefinite sentences, this is a mistake. We should get rid of it. The richest country in the world could have free medical care for all. That's something that's within our grasp, it's within our reach, and there's no reason we don't have it. Who's against? I can feel it. How could you be against people having access to medical care? And the idea that somehow it's the choice is between Obamacare or something else. I'm not for Obamacare. That's not where I'm coming down. But the idea that we can't have good public schools for all kids or free health care for children, why can't we have these things, the richest country in the world? And part of the reason we don't have them is because we spend $1 trillion a year on military bases, 1,000 military bases around the world. This is a waste of money. Permanent war is a waste of our resources and a waste of our energy and our intelligence. We can do better. And that's really all I'm saying. I'm saying that we have an agenda and that we can, and perhaps we can overlap in our agendas. I think we can oppose wars of choice. The idea that Obama somehow created ISIS, look back to the recent history, even in your lifetimes. The idea that every president in the since World War II, who sat in that throne of empire has expanded war, has made war, has created more war. This is a catastrophe for us. And the fact is that you can go and look up the pictures. These are facts, not fantasies. Dinesh called himself a Reagan Republican. Reagan was meeting with the jihadis in the White House saying they were freedom fighters because they were fighting the evil empire of the Soviet Union. A few minutes later, they wanted revenge on us who had betrayed them, and then we have Al-Qaeda. Same with ISIS. Why did we invade Iraq? That was an invasion that didn't have to happen. And the people who opposed that invasion were never called upon to then make the solution, to go into the halls of power and make the solution. The very people who got us into it were the ones who were called upon to get us out of it. And of course, they expanded. Libya, Syria, Yemen, again and again, it was U.S. stumbling into the area, not with good intentions, with terrible intentions. The idea that the invasion of Libya had any good intentions, I can't see it. I know there was the rhetoric of bringing democracy. And whenever they say they're going to bring democracy, I always wish they would bring them the Electoral College. Bring something like that, something that we don't need. When you say two, what do you mean? Two what? Oh, thanks. Schools is something I actually know a fair amount about. Why can't we have decent schools for all kids? This is something that's in all of our interest, and we ought to have them. And the idea that Arne Duncan, who was the head of the Chicago Public Schools for 7 years, and then head of the nation's schools for 7 years, and he goes back to Chicago and he can't find a single public school for his own kids, that's an absolute damning comment on school reform as we've lived it out for the last several decades. There's nothing magical about it. But we as a democracy, as a people, ought to say that whatever the privileged, the most privileged, and the wisest parents have for their children, we should demand for our community's children. So if the privileged people get 25 kids in a classroom, we want 25 kids in a classroom. If the privileged get full arts programs in their schools, we want all schools to have full arts programs. If the privileged don't have to take standardized tests every month and don't have to be subjected to the Common Core, why do other people's children have to be subjected to those things? We should demand, as a free people, that what they get, what Arnie Duncan gets for his kids, we want for our kids. It's a simple kind of improvement. It's not utopian. It's within our reach. We can afford it. We should do it.
Mr. D'Souza, your rebuttal.
Let me start by saying a word about foreign policy and then pivoting to the issues of schools and healthcare. American foreign policy has been based for the past 50 years at least, and I would call it the principle of the lesser evil. The principle of the lesser evil says that in the real world, as opposed to in the fantasy seminar, you're often not choosing between the good guy and the bad guy. You're choosing between the bad guy and the really bad guy. That is anti-utopian. That is realizing that in the real world you have to make choices. Now, in World War II, the United States allied with a bad guy, Stalin, because another bad guy, Hitler, posed a greater threat at the time. Anybody who wants utopianism, why did we ally with the bad guy, has got to explain whether that was a good idea in order to win World War II. Similarly, the Reagan administration in the 1980s recognized that the Soviet Union between 1974 and 1980 had occupied 10 countries. It had invaded Afghanistan with 100,000 troops. A group of Muslims from all over the Muslim world were fighting against the Soviets. The United States backed them. We didn't send troops. This was the Reagan doctrine. They fight, we help. The Soviets were shooting at these Muslims from helicopters. We gave them Stinger rockets to shoot the helicopters down. Was that defensible? Obviously, yes. It was the principle of the lesser evil. We were helping Muslims recover control of their own country. So when people say, as many do, the United States has consistently been against the Muslims, wrong. The United States is actually responsible for liberating a significant part of the Islamic world from Soviet occupation. Now, later, in a separate fight, the Taliban comes to power in Afghanistan. Later, separately, bin Laden declares war on the United States, and we say, well, then why do we support those guys? Because in the real world, you don't have the privilege of hindsight. In the real world, you have to make decisions with information available at the time. Now, that's just a word on the subject of foreign policy. Now I want to turn to domestic policy. Why are the schools, Bill Ayers asks, so bad? Funding on American public schools has escalated fantastically. It has gone up many, many times from what it was, and yet the schools never seem to improve. And yet, we never see people like Jesse Jackson protesting outside the public schools, even though black kids can't get a good education seemingly anywhere in the whole city or in the whole state. Now, why is that? Similarly, healthcare. People say healthcare costs keep rising. Why do healthcare costs keep rising? Healthcare costs keep rising for a really simple reason. The guy who's getting the benefit is not the guy who's paying. Now, let me engage in a moment of speculative, progressive reasoning for a moment. We have a right, no less for healthcare, we have a right to eat. We have a right to food. Who would deny that the right to prevent ourselves from starvation is as basic a right as healthcare? All right, now let's have Obamacare as applied to food. You will now be allowed to go to the grocery store and order whatever you want. Fill up your cart, you don't have to pay. Somebody else will pay. What's going to happen? The first thing that will happen is you'll take all kinds of stuff that you don't need. You'll fill your cart, you'll buy 12 cartons of milk and 45 cartons of bologna. And then you go up to the counter, and the grocery store will realize that they can charge whatever they want because you're not paying. So they will escalate their prices. The basic idea is that what's going on, you and the grocery store are conspiring to rip off the taxpayer. A third man is being cheated. And so what's going on with free education, free healthcare, is the taxpayer is being ripped off to give so-called free stuff. One final word about the free education scam. We're going to give you all a free education, right? And all the Sanders supporters in the audience go, yay. But how are we going to give you a free education? Hillary's proposal will cost $350 billion. The United States is $17 trillion in debt. We don't have the money, so we're going to have to borrow it. We borrow the money, and who's going to pay the debt? This debt is going to be handed right over to your generation to pay. So what's really going on with this education proposal is that Hillary is reaching into your back pocket, taking your own future earnings and using them to pay for your education now. She's not robbing Peter to pay Paul. She's robbing Paul to pay Paul. It's a progressive rip-off scheme, and we should be realistic enough to recognize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. In the next phase of the debate, I will be posing some questions. These questions were submitted anonymously online by students and community members here at the University of Michigan. From over 80 questions submitted, the questions I pose were selected by the Young Americans for Freedom and have been slightly edited. My first question, I'll begin with you, Mr. Ayers. In what ways did the founding of the United States and its Constitution shape the notions that the individual and freedom are of fundamental importance?
Yeah, I'm not capable of answering that with any depth, but I would say that the history of our country is a history of two. It's deep in our country's DNA as well as deep in our human DNA, that we are both striving for individual freedom and also community, that these things are always in balance, that the recognition that we should be free, each of us, to pursue our own identities, to build ourselves and to participate and be creative and imaginative and entrepreneurial, these are deep in our DNA. But equally deep is the idea that we're part of a community. The idea that you could do it alone is just, talk about utopian, it's absolute fantasy. Every one of us is here because of the work of other people, including the work in this room. But the idea that we ought to balance these things. So yes, we need individual choice. We need individual freedom. But we also need to recognize and build the community. One example of that is free public education. I'm fascinated that Dinesh is against public schools. But public schools built this country in many ways. And we not only ought to have them, people in Winnetka, people in Grosse Pointe, they have public schools. They love their public schools. We ought to have more of them. What we're seeing right now in school reform is exactly what Dinesh describes as public education, which is entrepreneurs moving in, creating charter schools that are in many cases for profit, but they're all privately managed, and they're taking taxpayer money to do it. They're not actually doing anything entrepreneurial to build anything. They're taking taxpayer money to advance their own profits.
One way to really tackle this public school problem at the root would be for the government, based upon need, to take poor students and put into their hand real purchasing power. And so, for example, if it was parents and students who had that same $10,000 that the school may be spending, but now the money isn't given to the school, because the school has no incentive to spend it well, but it's given to the parent, it's given to the kid, so that the kid now can say, I don't like that school, it's doing a terrible job, and I can spend this money at a public or private school wherever I want. Suddenly the forces of competition come into play, just as the way that the post office has been radically improved in the last 20 years, thanks to the institution of Federal Express. Once there's competition, suddenly the government bureaucrats seem to realize their jobs are imperiled and they begin to move a little faster.
You know, I like your idea, Dinesh. Can I just say, Dinesh, I like your idea of choice. If you would say, next to this segregated poor school in the south side of Chicago, right next to it, you're going to build Sidwell Friends, or you're going to build the University of Chicago Lab School. And we'll just say to people, which one do you want? If that's the choice you're talking about, but you're saying they can go anywhere. They could go to Winnetka. How are they going to get to Winnetka?
They don't need to get to Winnetka, Bill, if there are large numbers of people in inner cities. If each of them had $10,000 of buying power, you can be very sure that 10, a lot of entrepreneurs would be creating some very good schools in those regions to compete for those dollars.
Not for 10,000, and you're asking the taxpayers to say they would back that because nobody else is going to do it, but you're not actually giving real choices. And we're seeing this right now with the charter movement. There's no choice between a great school and a crappy school. It's two crappy schools. In many ways, the charter schools have doubled down on the very things that make the failing schools fail. They've doubled down on drill and kill. They've doubled down on testing. They've doubled down on getting rid of the arts. Those are not things. If the privileged won't send their kids to that school, then that's not a good school. Correct.
And look, there's no question that what's going on, the reason the schools in Winnetka are better is that those parents are not only putting in more money.
The reason that they're better is because the parents in Winnetka put in the money?
No. I'm saying the tax base is much stronger there, and so there's more money going into education than in the inner city, right? Okay, so more money helps. Parental involvement also helps. High standards also help. Being able to fire teachers also helps. And so...
Wait a minute. Really? Firing bad teachers. I love this. Firing the bad teachers is what we need to do. If you say, and this is absolute orthodoxy among some people, the idea that it's the lazy, incompetent teachers that are driving the schools down. The reality is that in the whole school reform moment, short-termers who are doing a tourist duty in the inner city, these are the people who are terrible teachers. We need veteran teachers who see teaching as a career. If I said, instead of saying we need to get rid of the lazy, incompetent teachers, if I said every kid deserves a caring, intellectually grounded, well-paid, well-rested teacher in the classroom, I hope you'd agree with that too.
All right. Thank you both. Let me move on to my second question, and this will begin with you, Mr. D'Souza. If you could have been one of the framers of our Constitution, what would you have changed?
I think the framers of the Constitution they recognized that government has an inherent disposition to abuse its power. And the reason for that is that government is the only institution that has compulsory power, confiscatory power. People say big business, I'm scared of big business, but big business can't exercise power over you if you don't let it. You have to get in your car and go down to the Apple store and give Steve Jobs money in order to get your iPhone. The meter maid, the little bureaucrat, the guy at the DMV, the fellow in the immigration office, they have far more power over you. So the founders knew this, and they set up a whole set of blocking techniques to prevent this power from being abused. Separation of powers, checks and balances, limited government. We have overridden many of those checks. Limited government is a joke. Government essentially now invades every nook and cranny of your life. So if it were me, I would put in tougher enforcement mechanisms at the beginning, essentially to prevent this government from having run amok in the way that it has.
Mr. Ayers.
I'd have abolished slavery and given women the right to vote. I see. It's
Can I address that?
None of you guys applauded abolishing slavery. That's fascinating.
So, Bill,
yes.
How would you have abolished slavery? You have 13 states that got together in Philadelphia. Slavery was legal in every one of them. You abolish slavery, who's going to join the Union?
But you agree with me that abolishing slavery would be a good idea
of course.
if we could do it.
That's what I call utopianism. In other words,
no, it's not
the founders had real choices available to them. You're offering a different choice that was not on the table, that could never have created a union, and you're saying they should have done that. I agree they should have done that, but that was not an actual choice available to them at the time.
it's just not true. There are all kinds of ways that one could have argued for it, but the fact is that the founders were people who were in favor of slavery. That's a fact. And it's not in itself a condemnation. It's a recognition of an historical fact that we can actually do something about today. Slavery was abolished because of the abolitionists. Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist, but he responded to an abolitionist movement. And in that response, he did the right thing. The afterlife of slavery immediately took over. And then we had the black codes, we had Jim Crow for a century, and we then had a second abolitionist movement that got rid of Jim Crow formally. But the afterlife of that continues to this day. And that's why we have a Black Lives Matter that's so important right now, something we should all support and mobilize to help. I know that some of you are libertarians, and that's great. Thank you. I would think for those of you who are libertarians, you would see the Sandra Bland case, for example, as absolutely a cause you'd want to unite with. Here's a Black Lives Matter activist on her way to Texas, stopped for a traffic light, for a taillight violation. She was in her private car, smoking her private cigarette, pursuing her private habit, and the police officer confronted her and demanded that she put out the cigarette. Don't you find that offensive? The state moving in on this person, isn't that offensive? No, it's not. Okay. So we know where we stand. I think you say you want less government, but only some less government. And this is a very important, I think, difference between us. Everyone, you and I both, think that part of the role of government is to tax and spend. The only question worth debating is tax whom and spend on what. You want to spend on the military, you don't object to the police pulling over Sandra Bland, but you do object to free public schools. That's where we differ, and those are things we should debate as a country and as a people.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
We'll move on.
Thank you. Okay, so my next question, and this will be first for you, Mr. Ayers. Given your own personal experiences, do either of you feel our criminal justice system has become too political?
Our political justice system is a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe, and it's and what was exposed in Ferguson, that the criminal justice system is kind of powered. The financing of it is powered by the kind of targeting of poor people. That's true in Ferguson. It's true in Chicago. One of my sons is a public defender in San Francisco. He deals with poor people every day who are run through the system for the most petty things, and they absolutely are caught up in, in a vice that really steals from them and kind of purrs along in an oppressive way. So I think our criminal justice system is catastrophic and needs to be dramatically changed. One of the things I think is also catastrophic in it is that the political system is something that's now for sale. It's on the auction block. And Dinesh referred to his time in custody. Were you in custody? I'm not sure. He had an assistant.
I was in overnight custody.
He had an assistant drop him off at his sleeping quarters overnight. I offered to write him a letter to the judge asking him not to put Dinesh in prison. He turned it down because I was going to advocate that he go to North Carolina and register voters, which would fit the crime of corrupting the political process in New York. But no, I think the criminal justice system is deeply corrupt, and it's corrupted by politics.
Okay.
Okay.
The inequity of our criminal justice system is on full display right on this podium right here. So I gave $20,000 of my own money over the campaign finance limit. I got 8 months in overnight confinement.
8 months or 8 years?
8 months.
You said 8 years.
You bombed the Pentagon and tried to bomb all kinds of other things.
What are you cheering for?
How much time did you do in the slammer?
No, the fact is that you admitted to committing a felony, which you did, and it was a felony that was pretty serious in a democracy, which was an attempt to buy an election.
All right.
Attempt to buy an election.
Look, Bill, right about the time my case was going through the court, another fellow named Chatwal, another Asian Indian guy, we Asian Indians appear to specialize in campaigns finance violations. But in any event, this guy gave 180 grand in straw donations to Hillary Clinton and a whole group of Democrats. He was also found guilty of witness tampering, and he boasted about corruption. He goes before a judge in New York, a federal judge, no prison, no confinement. So here's my point. Yes, justice is a matter of did you break the law, but it's also a matter of does the penalty fit the crime? Do other guys who do the same thing get roughly the same offense? Under the Obama administration, I will say that progressive justice is a complete sham. It's an oxymoron.
So I will pose one final question. Does embracing diversity necessarily include diversity of thought? If not, how do we as a society decide which opposing viewpoints should be embraced or protected and which should be censored? Mr. D'Souza.
I suspect this is where Bill Ayers and I will agree, and that is that you can't have a democratic society without free and open democratic debate. This is especially true on the university campus, because the university campus is actually insulated from society deliberately to allow it even wider parameters of debate than are permitted in the society at large. And so I find it particularly shocking and disturbing that the more elite the campus in America, very often the narrower the parameters of acceptable debate. This isn't just a matter of fighting political correctness or saying the most outrageous thing that comes to your mind. It's being able to have real discussion, even of controversial issues like racism and sexism, to be able to dive into those issues and truly speak your mind. That has not been the case, I think, on the American campus for 25 years, and it's a cause on which the left should join the right in stopping that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there must be diversity of ideas. That's the essence of what it means to be in a democratic society. You must listen to, with the possibility of being changed, opposing views. You have to be open to it, but you don't have to cave into it, and you have to speak openly too. Participatory democracy is an active process. In fact, democracy, I think of democracy as a verb. Not a noun. I think that we need to be active, and I think all of us need to be active, whatever our perspective. So on that, we agree. I think this idea that political correctness has taken over somehow is a little bit of a fantasy, and I know it's orthodoxy. I know it's orthodoxy. You know, I love Donald Trump the other day. This was perfect. He said, I would call Megyn Kelly a bimbo, but that wouldn't be politically correct. Look what he did. He got to call her a bimbo and claim that he was being a rebel for doing it because he wasn't politically correct, and then say, I'm not doing it. The fact is that there's a lot more discussion of it than there is the enforcement of it. Language should be free. We should talk about things we need to talk about, and that means not just yes, some controversial things. The controversial things ought to be at the center of it. In colleges, you talked about the elite universities. The reality is places like Wheaton College, Concordia College, the college you were president of, these are places that enforce orthodoxy and do not allow dissent. You have to sign a pledge at these places in order to teach there. So the idea that it's Yale and Princeton that are somehow a problem, no. But when people at Princeton, for example, say, we want to challenge Woodrow Wilson, being, you know, the name of the school being Woodrow Wilson or Wilson Hall or whatever. That shouldn't be the cause for people to freak out and say, oh my God, political correctness. Look into Wilson's record and ask yourself, should we or shouldn't we? Should we take down the Confederate flag or shouldn't we take down the Confederate flag? It's history, or it's time to change that history. It's time to kind of move on. Seems to me that moving on isn't a bad thing. And having a conversation about Woodrow Wilson's record isn't a bad thing. And to say, we can't talk about Woodrow Wilson because that's politically correct, you progressive idiots. No, I think Woodrow Wilson too is able to be talked about.
Woodrow Wilson was in fact a racist Democrat.
Absolutely.
He was one of the collaborators with the Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely.
Another racist Democrat, actually the founder of the Democratic Party, is Andrew Jackson,
Absolutely.
who was not only a slave owner, but essentially used the trading of Indian land to enrich himself as a military general. So so the Clinton Foundation is in a very old tradition of racist Democrats who have been benefiting from.
I know. this is why I said, Dinesh, this is why I said at the beginning, I'm not a Democrat, and you know I'm not a Democrat. So the idea that somehow the left represents the Democrats and the Republicans are the two great war parties. They're the two great parties of Wall Street. They always have been, and they still are. So not only am I not a Democrat, but you're absolutely right. Andrew Jackson, the Democrats were on the wrong side in the Civil War. The Democrats are the ones who brought us welfare reform. The Democrats are the ones who brought us criminal justice reform and the militarization of the police. I don't support any of that. So to kind of say, oh, it's the left and the right, what, you're defending the Republicans and I'm defending the Democrats?
No, no,
Never.
I wasn't scoring the point against you. I do think it's interesting that people, you know, if you ask people about civil rights, they'll say, well, Rosa Parks didn't sit in the back of the bus.
That's correct.
Yeah, and Martin Luther King. And the Democratic Party did play a role in the civil rights movement. Now, a lot of Republicans did too.
Very small role.
And the main opposition to civil rights came from Democrats, as you know.
That's correct.
The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Bill. Now, not a whole lot of people know about Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass was a Republican. Frederick Douglass was a great abolitionist, a man at least as great as Martin Luther King. So part of what I'm getting at is we have seen a progressive rewriting of history in which the Democratic Party's official role in promoting slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, lynching, the Ku Klux Klan, this whole history has somehow not only been erased, but it's been fobbed off on the Republicans, even though at the time when blacks were vulnerable to the Democrats, their only friend was the Republican Party.
Yes, Abraham Lincoln. But you are, Dinesh, you are trying to score points. Nobody is defending the Democratic Party, so you are trying to score points. And the idea that it's been rewritten, Frederick Douglass was a Republican. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. We know this, and that's great. But that doesn't mean that you can say, therefore, the Republican Party today is somehow operating in the tradition of Frederick Douglass. No, it's not.
Well,
I mean, that's absurd. That's absurd. So I'm not sure why you're using those labels.
The reason I'm using those labels is I think that what has gone on is part of what occurs in academia is we think of history as the stuff that happened yesterday or last year or 100 years ago. We don't realize that much of history is written by people who have a point of view, who are trying to make an argument. And part of what's gone on here is the attempt to sort of make the Republican Party into the party of racism, of bigotry, and give the Democratic Party the kind of credentials that allow it to march behind the banner of civil rights.
What did I say that made you
I'm
think
not
that?
saying, look.
Okay, yeah, and the nice thing is that nobody has to make the Republican Party today, the contemporary, the party of racism. Donald Trump will do it for you.
Well, I think you know that until the day before yesterday, Trump was not a Republican. And even now, I don't think it's right to say that he speaks for the party. He does represent a deep discontent in the Republican Party. He's the most politically incorrect man in America. Republicans like that. And he is one of the very few rich guys who's proud of being rich. In fact, he wishes he were richer.
That's right.
And that was a refreshing contrast with Romney, who seemed very apologetic about having made money.
You know, that's one of the differences between a progressive radical like myself and a billionaire or a Buddhist, because they want to go on being billionaires and Buddhists. I don't want to be a radical. I want things to be resolved so that I can go to sleep and take it easy for the rest of my life.
So I have one final question before we open up the floor to Q&A. And this is for you, begin with you, Mr. Ayers. Does the United States have an immigration problem?
Huh. I think so. I think we have an immigration problem, and I don't know how to solve it. And I'm not sure where we would go with it. But I do think that one of the problems is we allow capital to flow without borders, and we make workers, stop at the borders. I think we have to be honest and say, look, Dinesh's view of immigration, that if we opened the borders, everyone would come, is nonsense. Even the Irish wouldn't have come during the potato famine, except they were starving. That's why people come. They come from Mexico because the agricultural system in Mexico has been destroyed, and it's been destroyed by things like NAFTA. So I think we have a lot to do, but I don't think it doesn't begin by saying, here's the wall, nobody can come in. I wore my Black Lives Matter t-shirt, but I could have worn a t-shirt that says, stop stop illegal immigration starting in 1492. We're a land of immigrants. We should be proud of it. We should embrace it. And we should find ways to welcome people who need to be welcomed.
Look, we have 6 billion people on this planet. According to the United Nations, close to 2 billion of them live on a couple of bucks a day. You agree that for those people it would be better to cross the border? Wouldn't they find a better life in the United States? So if we took down the borders, don't you agree that a couple of billion people would like to come?
Not always, no. In fact, I think one of the reasons that there are 88 people who have the same amount of wealth as 3 billion people, one of the reasons is rotten, tax policy and rotten corporate policy. We need to fix that, and that would fix the problem you're describing.
Bill, I'm sitting in the confinement center, and a guy was telling me, Mexican guy, about life in the Mexican prisons. He goes, in the Mexican prisons, there are no cells. You just have a corner. That's your corner. And he goes, in the Mexican prisons, the kind of food, you don't even know if it's real meat, and people rape you. And the conditions he described, he goes, by contrast, American prison, he goes, it's like going on vacation, man.
Yeah.
Right? So what I'm getting at is...
What's your point? I'm not sure following you exactly.
The point I'm making at is that conditions are very difficult in much of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
They're infinitely better in the United States, even under conditions of incarceration. So the realistic starting point of immigration policy is we want to have a generous immigration policy. We're a nation of immigrants. But if we took down the walls, a whole bunch of people would come here. That would be very difficult for the country to digest in the short term. So yes, I agree with you. We need intelligent immigration policy, but I think your starting point is kind of crazy.
What's my starting point?
Your starting point is that hardly anybody wants to come here in the first place.
No, that's not my starting point. My starting point is to say we need policy that doesn't create, for example, wars in the Middle East. That's the immigration problem in Europe that's also affecting us. It's American wars that caused it. American invasions of Libya, Saudi Arabia, of Syria, Iraq, and so on. These are the things that have caused the catastrophe that we're now dealing with. And we like to start, the conversation about immigration by saying, what's our immigration policy? We should start back a bit and say, let's not start another war in the Middle East.
On that note, let us move on to the question and answer period. Anyone who'd like to pose a question, please come up here to a microphone in the front. As I mentioned before, it's very important that the questions come as questions. Please keep them as brief as possible, so each of you will have an opportunity.
Yes, you said America is a place where people could find their dreams, and that's really wonderful. What if my dream is to become a very rich person? Can you tell me what the moral claim on my life, my wealth that you would have, but to redistribute my wealth?
What do you mean redistribute the wealth?
To give it to other people who I don't know and don't care about.
Again, are we talking about taxes? Are you raising the question of taxes?
Well,
because taxes is redistributing wealth.
My question is what moral, even taxes. I don't believe in taxes. What moral claim would anybody have on my wealth to give it to someone else?
I understand. You don't believe in taxes, and so we're in a different world. But the fact is that you making money, anybody in this country making money, also depends on the collective having built railroads, roads. I mean, I assume you got here on a road, correct?
I got here on a car that we bought.
You bought
with
the car,
hard work.
You drove it on a road, a socialist road, correct?
I'm against that too.
What I'm saying is, look, the idea that there are somehow, look, tax policy favors the wealthy in this country overwhelmingly. It's a struggle about what taxes should be paid and and government policy. There is no such thing as the free market. The free market is regulated, contested, politicized, and usually to the advantage of the very privileged. Not always, but usually. And the fact is that if you make money, you're making money in a port that was built by the community itself, an airport built by the community itself. So the idea that you somehow live by yourself without any support from anyone is utter nonsense. Talk about utopian, that's a fantasy. The fact is we have to balance your individual rights, your individual entrepreneurship, your individual initiative and courage with the community's needs, because we are a community and you depend on it and I depend on it. Let's not pretend that you're just standing alone in a field making wealth by yourself. You're not.
Next question, please. Next question, please.
Yes, I'm not going to waste my time on the con man, Bill Ayers over there. So my question, and I mean that, thank you. My question is for Mr. Dinesh D'Souza. I just got done reading your book, Stealing America. I found it very, very good, and I really appreciate it, so thank you for writing it. And I want to know how much you were influenced by the writings of Ayn Rand.
Yipes.
The question is about the philosopher Ayn Rand. And Rand, I have disagreements with Rand. Ayn Rand wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness and defended the idea of selfishness as a virtue. And I've written about that, so I won't say much about it now. I think the great insight of Rand was to appreciate the genius of the entrepreneur. I say this because a whole bunch of writers, going all the way back to Marx, have reduced the entrepreneur to the capitalist. And Marx thought that capitalists supply only one thing, which is capital. They supply money, and then laborers do all the work. All of Marxism is based on this distinction of the capitalist and the worker. But in reality, the entrepreneur is not a capitalist in that sense. Entrepreneurs don't typically supply capital. Steve Jobs did not make the iPhone with his own money. He went to a bank. So entrepreneurs take loans. They go to venture capital firms. What entrepreneurs supply is the idea for the business. And the genius of the iPhone is that there was no demand for it. People didn't write Steve Jobs a letter, make an iPhone, let it have apps, let it do this, let it do that. He thought of it, and he built it before you knew you couldn't live without it. That Rand understood not only the intellectual innovation of the entrepreneur, but the organizational genius of then putting that together. Many people have great ideas and do nothing with them. But Rand knew that the entrepreneur has to organize the whole enterprise and make it work. The entrepreneur also takes risk. The employee takes no risk. And an entrepreneur can't say, you know, we had a bad quarter, give back 30% of your paycheck. No. At the end of the day, the laborer gets paid, the entrepreneur only makes money if there's money left over. So Rand understood all this, and I think for that alone, she deserves to be read.
Next question, please.
Oh, you have to hold it. Okay. I'd just like to, did I hear you right on the radio this morning, Professor Ayers, that you're against Common Core? I know Dinesh probably is.
I don't know if Dinesh is.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about Common Core, but from what I know, it's kind of a bad idea.
Yeah. I know a lot about Common Core, and the big catastrophe that Common Core is, and I am against it, and the reason I'm against it is because it perpetuates and intensifies the wrong direction in education, which is a constant obsession with standardized testing, which not only sorts winners from losers, but as Dean Martin will explain to you as a statistician, the problem with the standardized tests is, from a statistical point of view, is that anytime you say this is a performance metric, if you use it as a performance metric, it fails as a performance metric. Let me say that again. No performance metric works if you use it as a performance metric. So if the universe that you want to look at is good schools, and you say, we're going to do it through this test or through this simple, this one metric, then everyone will bend their efforts toward that metric. Common Core, along with the standardized testing regime that has gone crazy in this country, has reduced the notion of education to how you do on one simple metric. It's been a catastrophe for a generation, especially kids who are disadvantaged in other ways. And it's not real education. Education is big and bold and broad, and the Common Core narrows it because of its tie to testing. So no, I'm opposed to it.
Next question, please.
Briefly, I'm from Flint, Michigan, and there are a lot of the national medias. What are your viewpoints on the Flint water crisis?
Mr. D'Souza.
I'll defer to you on that.
I'll defer back to you. Well, I'll tell you, to me, it's a great example of what I said when I opened, which is, in my view, when you have a problem in a democracy, the answer is always more democracy, not less. What's happened in Michigan, and not Flint's only one example, but it's a catastrophic example, is that you decide to run it like a business, and a business has profit and loss, and it has austerity, and it has cutting corners, and you poison an entire population. Rick Snyder should be driven from office. Oh, by the way, just to be bipartisan, so should Rahm Emanuel.
Next question.
My question is for Mr. D'Souza. So you are an immigrant, and the vast majority of American economists are strongly in favor of open borders and believe that the long-term economic impacts of immigration are positive. What credible arguments do you think there are for restricting the free movement of labor across borders?
We live in a world, whether we like it or not, of nation states. If we didn't have those nation states, I think free movement of labor and capital would be a good idea. Nation states come with two other factors that are beyond economics. The first is national security. In other words, we are members of a social compact, and we make an agreement among ourselves to extend rights to our citizens. Aliens, people who come from the outside, have natural rights, but they don't have civil rights because they're not members of our community. They have to become part of our social compact in order for that to happen. So my point is simply this. Every community has the right to set the rules. It's like a club. You get to decide who's going to be a new member and on what terms. And that is because we live in a world of nation states. We have the right to protect ourselves. We also have a right to decide, for example, that if a very large number of immigrants came in a very short time, our culture would be irreparably changed. We all may have an agreement to democratic rules of debate. We may let in 1 billion people who don't agree with us. They would then outvote us, and our country would be changed overnight. We have every right to say, we have nothing against those people, but we're going to take them in increments of... We have a generous immigration policy now. We take in 1 million legal immigrants a year. So I have no problem with a generous immigration policy as long as it's combined with national security and as long as we make it really clear to the immigrants, do you like our club? Then assimilate to its rules and practices. You assimilate to us, not us to you.
Next question, please.
Yes, my main question is going to be a little off field. What is your guys' positions on the advent of new technology, specifically the game changers like quantum computing, CRISPR biotechnology, and 3D printing on the current intellectual battlefield between, I guess, not necessarily the left, but maybe the progressives, perhaps, would be a better way of explaining yourself, and the right, in terms of like, what are we going to do when it comes to when some guy gets his hands on the ability to genetically modify a new weapon, or when somebody can use quantum computing to screw up our financial markets, as well as, like with the Second Amendment and 3D printing, what that means.
I know you were supposed to ask a question, but I wish you would answer that question because you've obviously thought about it a good deal and have a lot to say about it, but I can let Dinesh answer it.
Well, I'll just say that we have a system of technological capitalism, and Schumpeter said that that system would generate a gale of creative destruction, his phrase. And so what that means is that entrepreneurs will come up with new stuff, new ideas, new inventions. Remember, scientists can come up with an invention, but it doesn't become a product until someone figures out how to take it to market. So these inventions come out, and they have massively transforming effects. I mean, the simple establishment of websites, Expedia, Orbitz, has wiped out virtually the travel agent industry. So what I'm getting at is this is capitalism. It is unstable, it's unpredictable, but it produces the whole dynamism of American society. In principle, I'm not in favor of inequality, but I also recognize that you can't have this gale of creative destruction without inequality. And so the danger of obsessing about inequality is you then begin to curb the animal spirits that produce these remarkable changes that ultimately benefit not just Steve Jobs, but some third world guy in Kenya on a bicycle who's able to use his iPhone to be able to make a profit and make a living.
Next question.
Welcome back, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, both of you, for coming. I'd like an answer from both of you. I'm going to direct it to Mr. D'Souza first. What is the state of conservatism when helping the victims of Flint has been largely avoided?
I don't know enough about the Flint controversy to be able to comment fully on that. Bill Ayers emphasizes, when you run government like a business, this is what happens. I can tell you that my experience with government is never run like a business.
But should it be?
It should be. Look, I just spent just a couple of weeks ago, 3.5 hours at the California DMV just trying to get them to find my photo. Long lines everywhere. Now, if this was a business, everybody would have walked out. None of the customers would not put up with it. But we don't have a choice. We have to get the license renewed, so we sit for 3 hours. We have gotten used to being stupefied into submission by government. If the IRS bill were to send you a bill for $1,500, I assure you that probably without even contesting it, you'd pay it. Why? Because privately we're terrified of those people because they have unbelievable power over our lives. So the government gets to intimidate us, bully us, take our money, and at the same time we are in cowering suspicion. If you turn it over to the private sector, I assure you the IRS would be run much better.
It's remarkable to me because what we're seeing, there's an experiment going on right now. Flint is one example of it, but it's only one. What we're seeing in Chicago is the selling off of the public space to private entrepreneurs. And is life better because it was sold off? The Mayor Daley sold the parking meter franchise, which drives us all crazy. So now a private corporation, I think based in Europe, owns the parking meters in Chicago. They're making mega profits. They got themselves paid back from their initial investment in 5 years.
But Bill,
and they have a 99-year contract, and it's a catastrophe. And if you get into trouble with the parking system or the traffic system, you still have to go down to court and go through all that nonsense. But we don't benefit as a community from the parking meter franchise. The same is true of the public schools. It's being sold off in a fire sale. The eclipse of the public is a dangerous trend in the long term. We can complain about government, and then the idea that somehow businesses are streamlined and so on, not Commonwealth Edison. I mean, they're as bureaucratic and ridiculous as others. So it's a myth to say one is bureaucratic and clumsy and the other is streamlined and good. Some things business does very well. Many things it doesn't. Schools is one of the things it doesn't do well. Public mental health is one of the things it doesn't do well. Prisons is one of the things it doesn't do well.
It's one thing to talk about the government and the private sector. You're now describing everything that you just talked about is, I would call it, the hybrid area where government is able to do favors for this business over that business while taking money on the side. In other words, you're describing the handing out of monopoly contracts. And all the way going back to the railroads, government has been engaged in all kinds of backhanded corruption to give deals to these guys and to impose tariffs on those guys. That's not free enterprise. That's actually the perversion of free enterprise.
So how do you do free enterprise for example, in the red light cameras in Chicago? How would you do that? How would you organize that?
Well, I'm not sure how you organize the parking meter system in Chicago, but
what about the red light cameras? That's the other one that's driving us crazy, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the idea of giving a 99-year contract is problematic. I would be looking at the list of donors to the Daley campaign to see if the guys who got the contract...
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Right. And so to be honest, this may seem like a deviation, but I actually think that this is the key to the success of the Sanders campaign, because Sanders is Rip Van Winkle. He's a man who's just woken up from the 25-year sleep. He doesn't really know what's going on, but the alternative to him is an adopted member of the Corleone family.
Let's move on to the next question, please.
Mine's a three-part question. I want to say that I am a Christian, I believe in God, and I believe in biblical principles. And I'm looking at your shirt, Black Lives Matter. To God, every single life matters.
Could I just, yeah, I'm going to take this first.
And my question is, we're talking about the public school system, and a lot of the parents have gone forward. We have changed the way we are teaching our children. It's called Outback education is one part. Outback education isn't learning. You don't learn when someone tells you the answers. When your kids have a science test, and the teacher says, come on, you know.
Ma'am, could you please ask a question?
What I'm saying is, okay, let's go over what's at the schools. What's bringing the schools down? We have Outback education, where we have teachers teaching to the test. We have kids using calculators.
Question, please.
Okay, we're talking about the problem. Do you find that that's a problem, giving a first grader a calculator instead of learning their addition and subtraction problems? I mean, is that what you call learning and education?
Not me.
What change would you want to see that's going to help the education?
I'd like to say something about that, but first I have to defend my T-shirt because you said that you found it difficult or offensive or narrow. If I were wearing a T-shirt that said, "Stop the sexual assault of women," you would probably say of women and men. And that would sound more universal, but actually it would miss the point. If I were standing in Berlin in 1935 and I said, "Jewish lives matter," I had a banner, you wouldn't say all lives matter. Of course all lives matter, that's a given. But it's a problem is that we're actually facing something. Of course German lives matter, but the lives that were at risk, the lives that were being contested were Jewish lives, and in this case, black lives. It's useful to raise the slogan. Okay. I agree with you, all lives matter, and that's assumed. The problem is that we're looking at a situation where police violence against young black people is a plague, and it's something that should be stopped. So we should stand up for it.
Well, the reason your analogy is flawed is because in the case of the Nazis, all the power was in the hands of the Nazis, and the Jews were in a sense completely vulnerable. In the case of the cops and the black criminals who they are pursuing, there's often weapons on both sides. So black lives are in danger, and cops' lives are in danger. Not just white cops, black cops too. So one of the problems with saying Black Lives Matter is it misses the complex dynamism on the street in which cops are in very difficult situations, their own lives on the line, and difficult judgment calls have to be made. So yes, in every case, I think we should look at it. But when you have a whole mob outside the courtroom chanting Black Lives Matter, you don't get the feeling that objective justice is about to be doled out.
No, objective justice is never doled out.
Next question, please.
Hi, Mr. D'Souza. My name is Daniel Gordon. I'm a senior here at the University of Michigan, and I consider myself a young conservative. My parents are immigrants from South Africa. They came here legally. And I wanted to ask you, how can we as conservatives talk about the issue of immigration without coming off as being anti-immigration, but instead coming off as being pro-legal immigration, as my parents did, came here to this country to make a better lives for myself and my siblings?
I was thinking about this as I teach Hispanic immigrants English as part of my punishment.
Do you enjoy it?
I do enjoy it.
Good.
And it's exposed me to a whole world I didn't know much about. These are people who don't think about politics. You can't talk to them about the US Constitution. They just want to figure out how to get to the bus, get to work, write an email. In talking about politics, the way I talk to them is I say, look, American politics can be described. We have two parties, and one party sees America as a ladder of opportunity. It's the party of the ladder. Now, the government has a role. It's to hold up the ladder. But it's your job to climb. And how high you get is up to you. The other party, as I see it, believes not in the ladder, but in the rope. And that party doesn't really want a ladder. It would rather let the rope down from the roof and tell the immigrant, hang on, we're going to pull you up. And it's easier that way. You don't have to climb. They pull you up. But you're beholden to them. They can let you go, and down you plummet to the ground. So I tell my students, they're adults, but I tell them, hey, do you want to be immigrants of the ladder, or do you want to be immigrants of the rope?
What is the example of the rope? What's the rope? For example,
the rope
is
the
free public education the rope?
The rope is yes, it is, because you yourself says that free public education, although it gives you the illusion that A, it's free, and B, is education, is actually neither. It's neither free nor education. So it's selling immigrants on an illusion.
So you think that schools should all be privatized?
I'm saying that if...
everyone should go to Sidwell Friends.
I'm simply saying that if you gave buying power to the American consumer...
$10,000?
Well, I use that number, but we can debate that number. We can debate that number. We're talking about a systemic shift of moving the power away from the teachers' unions and the government bureaucrats into the hands of the parents. That alone would produce a revolution in public education.
Thank you for that great question.
Let me just say one thing about that, about education. You know, the earlier questioner, I didn't get to her question about education, but I'll say a couple of quick things about education. The idea that somehow the teachers' union is some kind of big self-interest that's a bugaboo is nonsense. Whatever you think of teachers, the idea that teachers should have a collective voice in educational matters makes absolute sense. In Chicago, when we have a burning building in downtown Chicago, and the firefighters have to figure out what equipment and personnel to send into that building. I want the voice, the collective voice of firefighters at the table. I don't want that decided by aldermen, and I don't want it decided by entrepreneurs. That's how it was when the country started. You know, your house was on fire, and people would come and bid on whether they're going to put it out. We don't want that. We want a good, strong fire department, and we want the collective voice of experience at the table discussing what the standards of putting out fires is. The same is true of teachers. Teachers have gone to school for years and years. They've got experience. It takes a good 5 to 10 years to become a good teacher. And the idea that somehow short-termers are going to come in and entrepreneurially, change things is absolute nonsense. And it's just not the way that we're going to improve the schools. So we can debate that further, but yes.
So we have time for one final question.
Damn.
My name is Jonathan. I'm going to do my opinion real quick and turn it into a question. My opinion is national security and the debt, national debt, I'm going to say national, excuse me, and I want to thank the two speakers and the host. I want to turn that into a question. I think national security, I'm very worried about our country, or paranoid, and the national debt's going to go off the cliff. It is loaded to the right a little bit. I would like to know if any of you two would like to answer that or speak on that. Thank you very much for being here.
I think you mentioned both national security and the national debt. He's saying both worry him, and how do you propose to deal with them? Well, we've talked a little bit about national security. I'll talk a little bit about the debt. I remember in the 80s, the left was apoplectic because of the Reagan deficits. And we kept hearing the phrase, $200 billion deficits as far as the eye can see. Bush was a big spender, George W. Bush, and his largest deficits approached $500 billion. But the United States had about $8.5 trillion of debt when Obama came in. We've now had 8 years of the Obama presidency, just about, and the national debt has actually doubled. That's $8.5 trillion added to the national debt under Obama's tenure. Suddenly, the left has gone totally dead silent on the issue. Now, here we are on a university campus. I can understand why apparatchiks for the Democratic Party don't want to talk about this. But there's no reason in the honest and open atmosphere of a campus we can't point fingers, look at how this happened, and basically say that progressive government should come to a halt until a problem of this magnitude is looked at. We're living, in a sense, in a dream world in which Hillary has new programs and Sanders has even more promiscuous programs, and everybody's forgetting we owe $17 trillion. In fact, we've got to stop talking about ourselves as a rich country when we have the entire GDP of the country for a whole year, every private citizen's income, add it all up, it would take that amount of money to pay off the national debt. So we're only rich in a certain kind of generic sense that we have abundance in our ordinary life, but that's going to be whittled down by the way, so our government is abusing us. It's abusing us by imposing on us a millstone of debt that at some point must be paid. This is the irresponsibility of progressive government, and I just wish that liberals would hold progressive government accountable.
I'll say one word. I'll speak to the national security question. I'll speak to the national security question, but just a quick word on debt. Debt is a result of both spending and income. And the fact is that Chicago public schools are broke on purpose. They're broke on purpose because we refuse to tax the rich. There's nothing wrong in Illinois with taxing the rich in order to pay off the debt. So the idea that you don't want a debt, but you also don't want taxes is kind of contradictory. But I want to speak.
Let me ask you, Bill, if I may.
Sure.
What do you think that? Let's take a very rich guy. What do you think the top tax rate in this country should be?
Well, under Eisenhower, it was 80%.
How high would it be under you?
So under me, I have no aspiration to that, and I have no, but it ought to be much higher. And the Bush tax cuts, which are in effect still, have created a crisis of itself. You know, the thing that I often think about is Bill Gates, a very nice guy, very smart guy, obviously. What allows him to be the superintendent of American schools? What allows him to be the chancellor of World Health? I mean, the fact is he has so much money that he can appoint himself to these positions, and it's nuts. But I want to speak instead to national security. As I said earlier, that we have, you know, we've created an expansive military that's impacted every part of our country. We haven't been honest about it. We haven't had a democratic response to it, that is a participatory response to it. We live in a mobilized kind of military state. We have not only ritual searches at airports, but we have a panopticon-like surveillance system. And I can't believe that we couldn't come together and agree that the fact that we're all being spied on all the time is unacceptable. Unacceptable. You guys, no?
Final word.
You know,
yeah.
But so I think that one of the things we have to do is learn to become a nation among nations. And that means getting rid of the $1 trillion military, getting rid of 1,000 foreign bases. They're not needed, and they lead to things like the adventure in Libya, where we created more terror, we created more chaos, we created more jihadists than were there before. We did that. Nobody had to do it, but we did it.
One concluding thought, Dinesh.
Yeah. Most of what you said I completely agree with. The Libya invasion was a total disaster. I think it was
Samantha Power.
It was undertaken for private profiteering reasons, not because of anything going on in Libya. There was no genocide in Libya. This was propaganda. You're also quite right.
Same with Iraq.
You're also quite right.
Yeah.
You're also quite right that we should worry about the militarization of our government, not just the NSA, but also the fact that right now, a lot of the agencies of our government come equipped with SWAT teams. The post office has a SWAT team. The Bureau of Land Management has a SWAT team. The EPA has a SWAT team. So these are not guys who come...
The Glen Ellen Police Department
They don't come to your
team.
door and say you can't grow that asparagus. They come with hundreds of cars and militarized vehicles and helicopters flying over your house.
Exactly.
And this is happening right now in America. So it is actually a tremendous scandal. Look, this has been, I think, a very stimulating debate. Bill, I think the only thing you haven't done tonight is repent of your past misdeeds. That would have been a really good idea.
Nor have you. We could have a whole discussion about past misdeeds. That would be interesting in itself. I'd love it.
That would be incredibly interesting, and I would love to moderate that discussion. Thank you.
It would get very personal very quick.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers and Mr. D'Souza, for being with us this evening. Thank you to all of you who are here with us tonight. I would also like to thank the 3,000 individuals who watched the broadcast of this event online this evening, and to all of you for participating in our discussion. Thank you all. Thank you also to the Young Americans for Freedom for sponsoring this debate. There will be a book signing for those that are interested outside of the hall outside of this hall and down to the right. Thank you all for being here. Have a safe evening, and go blue. Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to meet you.
Wow, that was quite a debate, and thanks a lot for watching. This is such an important time in our country's history. We want to affirm the principles that made America great. At the same time, there are very powerful people who want to take down those principles, who want to remake America. I'm trying to create a movement that will stand up for what is great and good about America, and I want you to be part of that movement. So please go to DineshD'Souza.com, follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, sign up for my email, and if you want to share this debate, you can do so from my website, DineshD'Souza.com. What are we trying to do? We're trying to construct a great right-wing conspiracy. Why? Because we want to mobilize you. We have a big movie coming out this summer. I want you to help me get the word out about that to people. And we have a big election this year, and I want you to be a part of that. So once again, my appreciation, thank you very much, and I hope you'll join me at DineshD'Souza.com.
It's been a long time coming, but tonight, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
The details of what he's like sometimes don't live up to the image you've created.
In some ways, we haven't seen the real Obama. People voted for Obama on the basis of what they hoped he would do.
I voted for him, I donated, I thought he was the one.
Is this what President Obama means by paying our fair share? The
the world could be a pretty scary place in 2016.
America isn't the problem. America is the answer. The Revolution was a struggle for the creation of America. The Civil War was a struggle for the preservation of America. World War II was a struggle for the protection of America. Our struggle is for the restoration of America.
And how badly we need right now a Washington, a Lincoln, a Reagan. Well, we don't have them, but we do have us.